What if the walls you believe separate you from the world are not real? What if your sense of I, the constant narrator in your head, is not who you truly are, but only a fragile pattern written in the brain? And what if that pattern could dissolve, revealing something far vaster, more luminous, and more connected than you ever imagined? For centuries, mystics have spoken of ego death, the dissolving of the self into unity with the cosmos. Their words were poetic, even mystical. But now, neuroscience is beginning to confirm that these experiences are not illusions. They are rooted in the very architecture of the brain. And the key lies in a network we all carry inside us, the default mode network. The default mode network, or DMN, is the brain's ego circuit. It is the hub of self-reference, constantly stitching together your identity, your memories, your sense of continuity. It is the internal narrator that says, "This is me. I am this person. I own these thoughts. I have this history." When the DMN functions in balance, it allows us to navigate the world with a coherent sense of self. But when it becomes overactive, something begins to shift. Neuroscientists now recognize that an overactive DMN is linked with rumination, self-criticism, obsessive looping, depression, and anxiety. The very network that allows us to feel like someone can also trap us in cycles of suffering. Imagine your identity as a tightly woven net. Every memory, every judgment, every belief is a thread. Over time, the net grows tighter. The gaps for new possibilities, for flexibility, become smaller. For some people, the net becomes a cage. They no longer experience life freshly. They only experience life through the stories their ego has already written. But here is where psychedelics, and specifically psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, open a door. Recent precision imaging studies using fMRI and MEG scans show something remarkable. Under psilocybin, the default mode network begins to dissolve. Its activity weakens. Its grip loosens. The tightly woven net of the self unravels. And in that unraveling, something astonishing emerges. When someone takes psilocybin, something profound happens in the brain. The usual rhythm of the default mode network, the brain's ego circuit, begins to fall apart. Scientists call this desynchronization. Brain regions that normally move in perfect step with the ego network start to break free. Order gives way to a kind of controlled chaos. The hippocampus, the seat of memory and emotion, loosens its grip on the self. Sensory regions, which are usually filtered through the DMN, begin to speak directly to one another. The brain, normally ruled by rigid hierarchies, enters a freer, more fluid state of connectivity. To a scientist, this shows up as disrupted oscillations and shifting connectivity maps. But to the person living it, it feels utterly different. It feels like the walls of the self are melting, like the boundary between me and not me has dissolved. Many describe it as merging with nature, with the universe, even with God. This is what researchers call ego dissolution. But for those who experience it, it doesn't feel like a loss. It feels like a discovery that beyond the endless chatter of the mind lies a presence that is vast, timeless, and whole. Some call it unity, others call it love. Some say it feels like dying, only to realize that what dies is not life itself, but the illusion of separation. This is the same experience shamans described when they called mushrooms sacred teachers. It is the same journey mystics hinted at when they spoke of surrender, union, and the death of the self. For decades, reports like these were dismissed as fantasy or hallucination. But today, brain scans reveal their fingerprints in neural tissue. What shamans once mapped in ceremony, neuroscience now traces with electrodes and imaging machines. Here, the mystical and the measurable finally meet. The visions of unity, the overwhelming sense of connection, the profound ego death. These are not just stories. They are states of consciousness reflected in the brain's very architecture. And perhaps the most remarkable part is not what happens during the trip, but what remains after. When the self dissolves and then returns, it does not come back the same. The cage is loosened. The net has new openings. Life feels wider, lighter, and more possible. For all its wonder, the true power of psilocybin may lie not just in the visions it reveals, but in the healing it leaves behind. Across clinical trials, from Johns Hopkins to Imperial College London, researchers are finding that even a single guided session can create lasting transformation. People struggling with treatment-resistant depression often describe a weight lifting. The cycle of self-criticism loosens. Veterans with PTSD report that memories once unbearable begin to soften. And those facing end-of-life anxiety speak of peace, acceptance, even transcendence. Science offers one explanation. When psilocybin disrupts the default mode network, it frees the brain from its rigid patterns. Pathways that once repeated the same depressive thoughts, "I am broken, I am worthless, nothing will change," begin to lose their grip. The brain enters a state of heightened plasticity. It becomes flexible again, open to new wiring and new possibilities. Therapists sometimes describe it as pressing a reset button. A mind stuck for years in loops suddenly steps outside its own maze. New connections appear. Old stories lose their authority. Life no longer feels so narrow, so fixed. But here's what's striking. The healing is not only neurological, it is existential. People say they reconnect with love, with meaning, with spirit. They describe moments of profound forgiveness, of themselves, of others, of life itself. This is why researchers stress that it's not just the drug, but the experience, and how you integrate that experience, that truly changes people. In fact, studies show that the more mystical the journey feels, the greater the lasting reductions in depression and anxiety. The science confirms what mystics always knew. When you glimpse the world beyond the ego, your ordinary world is never the same. This isn't about escaping reality. It's about touching a deeper reality and carrying its wisdom back. The mushroom opens a doorway, but it is the human heart and the human mind that must walk through, that must reflect, that must integrate what was seen. Here, ancient fungi meet modern brain science. The sacred and the scientific converge on a single truth. The dissolution of the self can be medicine. It frees us not only from rigid brain patterns, but also from the emotional prisons we build around ourselves. And what is striking is how familiar these discoveries sound. Long before brain scans, sages and mystics described the same dissolving of self, the same merging with the infinite. In Buddhism, it is called anatta, the realization of no self. The self is seen as an illusion, a passing construction, not a fixed identity. Awakening is seeing through the illusion and resting in pure awareness. In Sufism, mystics spoke of fana, the burning away of the ego in divine love. To lose oneself in God was not death, but liberation. In Christian mysticism, desert fathers and contemplatives wrote of surrender, where the small self falls away and only union with the divine remains. "It is no longer I who live," wrote Paul, "but Christ who lives in me." Even Hermetic philosophy points to the same unity, as above, so below. The self is but a fragment of a greater whole, a reflection of the cosmos. To transcend ego is to align with the universal. And here is what's extraordinary. The experiences reported under psilocybin map almost seamlessly onto these ancient paths. Where monks found stillness in silence, where mystics found ecstasy in prayer, where shamans found visions in ritual, modern participants find similar revelations through the dissolving of the default mode network. But here's the truth, psychedelics are not the only doorway. They are one path among many. Meditation, breath work, fasting, prayer, even a moment of awe in nature, all can loosen the grip of ego and open the same field of unity. The lesson is simple. The self is not as solid as it appears. The brain builds it, but awareness can loosen it. And when it loosens, healing, compassion, and freedom emerge. So how can you apply this without ever stepping into a psychedelic ceremony? Begin with awareness. Notice the inner narrator, the constant me and mine. See that it is only a thought pattern, not the essence of who you are. Practice presence. Sit in silence. Even just for a few minutes a day. Let the nervous system settle. Let the default mode quiet. Over time, perception softens and widens. Engage the body. movement, breath, rhythm. These anchor you beyond the ego's story. They remind you that life is not just thought, but living experience. And most of all, cultivate kindness. Every act of giving weakens the ego's hold. Every act of love dissolves the illusion of separation. In the end, kindness itself may be the most natural form of ego transcendence. The most important lesson of psychedelic neuroscience is that psilocybin can dissolve the ego. But more than that, it reveals a deeper truth. The self is not as rigid as we believe. What feels like an unbreakable identity is really a pattern, and patterns can change. When they change, life changes too. We often think we are stuck in our thoughts, stuck in old habits, stuck in the stories we've carried for years. But science shows us something different. Even the most stubborn brain patterns can loosen. Even a mind weighed down by depression, anxiety, or trauma can reset. That is why psilocybin therapy feels so powerful. It shows that transformation is possible. People describe it as a lived experience of freedom, a moment when the ego's voice no longer feels final. And once you've touched that freedom, it stays with you. You can't unsee it, and you can't forget it. But here's the empowering part. You don't need psychedelics to begin loosening the grip of the self. You can start right now with awareness. Notice the voice in your head. Watch how it clings to me, mine, and my problems. See it clearly as a pattern, not your essence. Practice presence. 10 minutes of stillness. A few conscious breaths. A simple walk in nature. Each one can quiet the default mode network. Neuroscience now confirms what wisdom traditions have always taught. When you step into presence, the brain itself begins to rewire. And most importantly, live with compassion. Every act of kindness softens the illusion of separation. Every moment of gratitude reminds the brain that life is larger than the ego's small concerns. These are not abstract virtues. They are tools for real neurological change. The science of psychedelics points to a universal truth. The ego is not the whole story. Healing begins when we stop clinging so tightly to it. Empowerment begins when we realize we have the ability, through awareness, through presence, through love, to step beyond it. So let this be the takeaway: you are not trapped. You are not broken. The walls of the self are not as solid as they seem. And whether through psilocybin, meditation, or simple daily acts of kindness, you can begin to dissolve those walls and discover the freedom waiting on the other side. Because beyond the self is not emptiness. Beyond the self is life itself. A life of clarity, connection, and possibility. A life you are fully capable of living. And if this journey spoke to you, consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who may need the reminder that transformation is possible. Together, we can bring these insights to more minds and more hearts.